Even in this stormy weather, a skilled sailor might float in and tie up at the jetty. There were 2 curved piers to shelter the narrow bay, built when stone from the quarry was carried out on big flat barges. People said that one of his madcap adventuring friends would appear, or the woman he was waiting for, because most of the villagers had convinced themselves that it would be a woman. Then one night, a few weeks after his arrival, Jem Rosco didn't come to the Maidens for his usual 2 pints of rough cider. The regulars immediately noticed his absence. They chatted amongst themselves and speculated that perhaps the expected visitor had finally arrived. Perhaps old Jem would bring the stranger into the bar the following night, and finally they'd know what all the secrecy was about. But Jem Rosco didn't appear again. They felt cheated. He might be an outsider, but for a while he'd become part of the community. He was a celebrity who'd been on television, sharing his travels, making his way up the Amazon, sailing single-handedly around the southern oceans with the world. Part of his glory had rubbed off on them, but now the excitement was over. Until the following morning, when the Coast Guard received an emergency call from a fishing boat in difficulty, sheltering from the storm in the lee of Scully Head. Then, it seemed, the excitement had only just started. Chapter 2. Mary Ford was woken by her pager. She looked at the bedside clock. 5 a.m. She'd marked herself as available on the lifeboat rota because her father was staying, and there'd be someone to look after the kids if she were called out. Time was slipping away for adventures like these. Soon Arthur would need a full-time carer, and she couldn't expect her dad always to be there. So, she'd thought, she'd best make the most of it while she could. She was out of bed and dressed, almost without thinking. She loved this. The excitement of a shout, the camaraderie and laughter with the guys, and she was helm now. Almost 3 years of training and she was in charge. In a place like Greystone, a woman in charge didn't happen very often. Sammy Barton was lifeboat operations manager this morning, and he'd like it even less than the others. But Sammy could stuff it. She knocked at her father's door. He'd most likely be awake already. Since Mary's mother had died, the man slept poorly. Mary often saw his light on in the early hours and knew that he was scrolling down his phone. Sometimes she heard the buzz of the radio and the measured tones of the BBC World Service throughout the night. Her father stayed over quite regularly now, ostensibly to help with babysitting. Mary had sent her bloke packing soon after Arthur was born, but really because he found it hard being alone in the cottage in the woods just outside Morisham. It had been easier when her mother had been alive, even after they'd moved her into the hospice. Then her dad had a purpose, planning the visits and the treats to brighten his wife's day. Now he was bereft. Dad was a real help, though. Since Arthur had become ill with the dreadful Jasper-Lynam disease, her father had become an important part of the household. She'd never heard of JLD until Arthur's diagnosis, and now she could think of little else. The cruel disease ate away at her son, like the tide eroding a sandstone cliff. There was the occasional good day when she had a flicker of hope, but it never lasted. She wouldn't have trusted anyone other than her father to stay with her boy. She'd never have gone out on the lifeboat, for example, if he hadn't been there, and that gave her the freedom and the excitement she craved. Today, Alan Ford was lying on his side and looking at his phone, checking Facebook or Twitter, finding the company that her mother would once have provided in social media friends and old work colleagues. "I've got to go." "The lifeboat?" Mary nodded. "In this storm?" Her father was trying to keep the anxiety from his voice, but Mary knew what he was thinking. Bad enough to lose Claire. He couldn't bear to lose a daughter, too. "The wind's dropped. Can't you hear? It's not supposed to blow up again for several hours. We wouldn't be allowed to launch if the forecast was too poor." A pause. "I have to go. There's everything Isla needs for school in her bedroom, but I'll probably be back by then. Arcee can go too if he's feeling up to it." "Sure, of course. On your way." Despite his anxiety, Alan wouldn't want to deny Mary the adventures that he'd experienced throughout his life. Outside it was strangely quiet after the storms of the previous days, a lull between westerly fronts. There'd be a big sea still, but wind shouldn't be a problem. It would soon be light. There was already a grey sheen to the sky behind the houses to the east. It would be quicker on foot than to drive, and Mary hurried down the street to the quay, but she didn't quite run. The pavement was still slick from rain, and the last thing she needed was to break a bone.